think about our British royal family, of course, they think about things that the history parts. And then we found out, obviously, due to papers being opened and diaries being exposed, that there's far more to it than first thought. And this is the case, really, of a story that's just emerged in the newspapers today. It's all about, of course, the disgraced spy, Anthony Blunt, who for a long period was inside Buckingham Palace, working basically as a sort of art historian for our late and brilliant monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. But the story goes, of course, that they didn't want to tell her the secrets that they knew. That was MI5, MI6, of course, because, they didn't really want this to be another scandal. Quite why that would be a problem when you consider the various scandals that the British monarchy have gone through remains to be seen. But as I found out a while back, actually, the Queen, alongside her sister, Princess Margaret, as ever, were one step ahead of the game. And they decided that there was only one lady that could do this particular, shall we say, unveiling. Let me explain. Morning, good to see you. Thank you so much as ever for joining me in the very heart of London's Underground for the moment as we wait for yet another train. Yes, I'm sure it's the same wherever you work. I just love this as well. When they put the phrase up there, 5 minutes, it must be 5 minutes in tube time. Because when you hear 9 minutes, you think, well, where's the 5 minutes? Do you have that? You know what I mean? I'm sure they just write things and then they think you'll never notice. Absolutely. Let's get back, of course, to your royal story. This caused a sensation, as one can imagine. Anthony Blunt was, of course, exposed as a spy, part of many different things, including the Cambridge Five. And when I was at school, this was a big story, seemingly because it was everything that you wanted, real life James Bond. But what's emerged actually is this, because everybody's now saying that, particularly Palace Papers that came out, that this particular secret, even though he was working inside the British monarchy for many years, was kept away from Her Majesty the Queen. Well, speaking to people very close, as one can imagine, to those royal sources, it simply wasn't the case. And there were two people inside that particular story that really helped Her Majesty the Queen. One was her sister, Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret, and the other was another Margaret, the Right Honourable Margaret Thatcher, the first female British Prime Minister. Let me explain. You see, one of the beautiful things about having a sister that was not only a beautiful socialite was that she literally mixed with all walks of life. And this was an advantage for our late monarch, Queen Elizabeth. You see, Margaret was out most evenings, literally went to all the best nightclubs, dining restaurants, knew all the political scandal, and simply because she moved in those circles. So what did they talk about? Well, many different things. And you see, Margaret would not hesitate in telling her elder sister the sort of scandalous gossip that she felt might be quite useful, particularly when dealing with politicians. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that this influenced, of course, Her Majesty the Queen, but of course it put her in a bit of a unique position simply because she knew all about the Perfumo scandal, this sort of skullduggery surrounding Harold Wilson, the Labour MP. You name it, she was totally across it, all the while serenely sitting there, knowing exactly what was going on. But what about Sir Anthony Blunt? Well, according to that source, Margaret told her sister all about the scandalous background, which was at that point totally unproven. But Her Majesty the Queen realised there was a point as to why she wasn't informed about this particular scandal. And even though he had full access to Buckingham Palace, the two sisters were very aware of just how oily and slimy Anthony Blunt was. In fact, they made something of a comedic giggle about it. He was literally dripping in oil in his sort of treatment of the Queen. Nothing was too much. She was right about everything, the sort of thing. And equally what then happened was, as this story developed, and in the early part of the 1970s, it really truly was escalating. Well, that's when the Queen decided to do further investigations. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because as Margaret Thatcher rose to prominence, contrary to what people think, the Queen was rather intrigued about the possibility of having the very first female leader, a female Prime Minister, wondering how these two would actually get on. So as early as 1975, according to my source, this particular situation was discussed. Some might suggest, of course, the Queen planting the seed to the very ambitious Mrs. Thatcher, being in power really 10 minutes, when of course she spectacularly stripped the titles away from Anthony Blunt. She couldn't wait. Now, according to a source, Apparently, that gave great delight to our late monarch, simply because nobody pulled the wool over Queen Elizabeth's eyes. She simply played a long game. She knew everything that was going on. And as I would say now, make no mistake, she knew a lot about Meghan Markle too. And some might suspect, a little bit like Anthony Blunt, had she lived a little longer, things might have turned out a little bit different. But let's not forget, the Queen was of course 96 years old and still as sharp as a tack. Sadly, like so many people, health, well, got the better of her. But for now, for those that think the Queen had no idea, trust me, according to an excellent source inside Buckingham Palace, she was very much across exactly what was going on right before her very eyes. Neil Sean, Whitehall, London.